The city moved like a clock, each second ticking with the rush of people chasing dreams, money, and a little piece of luxury they believed would make life worth living. Yet, hidden in a narrow street, behind a small restaurant with peeling paint and an old wooden sign, stood a woman who seemed to live outside of this race. Her name was Clara. To many, she was just a poor cook. But to the few who noticed her quiet presence, there was something unusual in her gaze, something that spoke of silent battles and scars no one could see. Clara's life had never been about riches or millionaire dreams. Every morning, long before the sun painted the sky with its warm tones, she would arrive at the restaurant wearing the same faded apron, her hands slightly calloused from years of work. She wasn't beautiful by the world's standards. Her hair was tied back in a simple bun, and her clothes were plain. Yet, there was an invisible grace in the way she moved, as if every step carried a story that was both heavy and sacred. People rarely looked at her. The restaurant staff didn't even know her last name. To them, she was the quiet cook, the one who worked tirelessly in the kitchen, but never seemed to fit in with the loud chatter of the others. She rarely spoke, not because she had nothing to say, but because she had learned the world often did not care about the voice of someone who had known pain. What no one knew was that Clara had once lived a life far from this one. Years ago, she had dreamed big, dreams filled with love, family, and the hope of building something lasting. But life had taken almost everything away from her. It started with a betrayal that broke her heart. A man who promised her everything, but left her with nothing but a deep emptiness. Then came the debts, the struggles, and the constant judgment from those who thought success was measured only by money and appearances. Clara, who once believed in luxury and comfort, now owned nothing but a small rented room and a heart full of quiet resilience. That day, the restaurant was unusually busy. Orders piled up, and the kitchen smelled of roasted meat, warm bread, and spices. Clara worked in silence, as always, preparing dishes she knew she could never afford to eat. At lunchtime, while the others laughed in the dining area, she quietly took her small portion of rice and beans, saving it for a quick meal before returning to work. But as she stepped outside to sit on the back steps of the restaurant, she saw something that made her freeze. Across the street, a little boy no older than 8 sat on the cold pavement. His clothes were torn, his face dirty, and his eyes were hollow, carrying the kind of hunger that wasn't just for food, but for warmth, for a sign that someone in the world still cared. He didn't speak. He just stared at the food in her hands, as if it were the most precious treasure in existence. Clara's heart tightened. She knew that look. She had been that child once, standing in front of closed doors, feeling invisible to the world. Her stomach growled. She hadn't eaten all morning, but something in her chest whispered louder than her own hunger. Without thinking, she walked toward the boy, knelt in front of him, and placed her lunch in his small, trembling hands. The boy's eyes widened, tears pooling in the corners, as if he couldn't believe someone would give him something without asking for anything in return. Clara smiled softly, touching his cheek with a motherly tenderness she hadn't felt in years. "Eat," she whispered. "You need this more than I do." What Clara didn't know was that, at that exact moment, someone was watching. Behind the large glass window of the restaurant, the owner, a man known for his sharp business sense and obsession with money and profit, had seen everything. His eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in curiosity. Why would a woman who had so little give away the only meal she had? The answer to that question would change everything. Now, if you're not already subscribed to the channel, please do so and leave a like. This will help me a lot with my work here on YouTube, and I thank you in advance. The boy devoured the food as if every bite were a miracle. Clara sat beside him on the edge of the pavement, not caring that the rough stones pressed against her knees. For a moment, the city around them faded. The noise of traffic, the distant laughter of those chasing dreams of money and luxury, the clinking of glasses inside the restaurant. There was only this small moment of quiet humanity where giving felt richer than anything money could buy. The boy, with his messy hair and shy eyes, looked up at her once the plate was empty. He didn't say thank you, maybe because he didn't know how. Instead, he just gave her a look that pierced her heart, a silent acknowledgement that she had given him more than food. She had given him dignity, Clara smiled and gently patted his hand, but inside her heart was trembling. Memories she had long buried came flooding back. There had been a time when Clara too had known the bitterness of hunger. She remembered being no older than this boy, standing by the corner of a bakery, inhaling the sweet smell of bread she could never afford. Her mother, a maid in a wealthy family's home, worked day and night, yet their table was often empty. Clara would watch the rich children with their clean clothes and their toys, wondering why life seemed so unfair. "Don't hate them," her mother used to say. "Just promise me you'll never let your heart grow cold." That promise had carried her through life, but it came at a cost. Clara had once fallen in love with a man who promised to take her far away from the struggles of poverty. He had dreams of success, of building a restaurant that would make them both proud, but dreams can sometimes turn cruel. He left, chasing his own ambition, leaving her with unpaid debts and a broken spirit. Clara had to work in kitchens, not because she wanted to, but because survival left her no choice. Her life had become a string of long shifts, low pay, and a silence she rarely dared to break. Back inside the restaurant, a few of her co-workers noticed she wasn't around. One of them, a waitress named Paula, peeked through the window and saw Clara sitting with the boy. Paula rolled her eyes. "There she goes again, acting like a saint," she muttered to another waitress. "No wonder she's still broke. If I had to choose between eating and feeding some random street kid, I'd choose myself. But not Clara. She always thinks with her heart." They laughed softly, unaware of how deep Clara's wounds ran and how every act of kindness was her way of healing. The restaurant owner, however, was still watching. His name was Roberto, and though he was respected for his hard work, he was also known as a man who believed success was everything. He had built his small restaurant from nothing, saving every cent, and he despised waste, especially when it came to food. Watching Clara give away her lunch confused him. He didn't feel angry, but there was something unsettling about it. It made him question things he hadn't thought about in years. Clara returned to the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron as if nothing had happened. She didn't mention the boy and no one asked, but inside she felt lighter, as if the little she gave away had somehow filled her heart more than the food could have filled her stomach. That night after her shift, she walked home through the dimly lit streets. Her legs ached, her body tired, yet her mind lingered on the boy's face. Where would he sleep tonight? Would he even survive another cold evening on the street? When she got home, Clara sat on her small bed holding a photo of her mother, now gone. "I hope you're proud of me," she whispered. A single tear rolled down her cheek. Her room was nearly empty. No signs of luxury, no riches, just a simple table, a chair, and a little lamp. And yet she felt richer in spirit than many of the people she served daily, people who ordered expensive meals but barely looked at the ones who prepared them. The following morning, Roberto walked into the kitchen earlier than usual. He didn't say a word but watched Clara from the doorway as she prepared ingredients with her usual focus. Something about her made him curious in a way he couldn't explain. Why would someone so poor give away what little they had? Was it foolishness or was it something deeper, something he had forgotten about life, something beyond money and success? His questions would soon find their answer, though not in the way he expected. If you had been in Clara's place, what would you have done? Tell me in the comments below. Roberto couldn't stop thinking about what he had seen. Throughout the day, while customers filled the restaurant, ordering meals that cost more than Clara earned in an entire shift, his mind kept drifting back to her small act of kindness. It wasn't just that she had given away her only lunch. It was the way she had done it, with no hesitation, no expectation, no fear of being seen as weak. That kind of love was foreign to him now. Once perhaps he had known it, but years of chasing money and building his business had hardened his heart. Later that afternoon, he called Clara to his office. The staff watched nervously, whispering among themselves. "Do you think she's in trouble?" someone murmured. Clara entered the small room, wiping her hands on her apron. She stood silently, not sure why she was there. Roberto, seated behind his desk, studied her for a long moment before speaking. "Why did you give your food to that boy?" he asked, his voice firm but curious. Clara looked down at her worn shoes. Because he was hungry, she said softly, almost as if the answer was too obvious to require explanation. Roberto frowned. And what about you? Don't you think you deserve to eat? You work all day. You barely earn enough as it is. Why would you give away what little you have? His words weren't cruel, but they carried the tone of someone who couldn't understand such a choice. Clara hesitated, then met his gaze. When I was a little girl, I was that child, she whispered. I know what it's like to sit on a sidewalk and watch people pass by as if you don't exist. I know what it's like to be invisible, to feel like nothing. I can't walk away from that. If I have something to give, even if it's not much, I give it, because I know what it feels like when no one does. Her words hit Roberto harder than he expected. For a moment, he had no response. There was something raw, almost painful, in the way she spoke. He dismissed her with a nod, but as she left, her voice lingered in his mind. The next day, the boy returned. He waited outside the restaurant, his eyes scanning the kitchen door as if searching for the woman who had shown him kindness. Clara saw him again and felt that same pull in her heart. This time, however, she hesitated. She didn't have enough food for both of them. The staff had been gossiping about her generosity, and she feared Roberto might see it as a problem. Still, when the boy's small, fragile hands reached out toward her, she couldn't resist. She shared her bread and a small piece of fruit she had saved from the kitchen. The boy smiled, his face lighting up as if she had given him a feast fit for a king. But this time, something was different. Roberto was standing in the doorway. He didn't say a word, just watched, his arms crossed. Clara felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. She expected him to scold her, maybe even cut her pay for wasting the restaurant's food. But instead, he remained silent, as though he was studying not just her actions but his own life. That night, Roberto walked home alone. His apartment was filled with luxury, expensive furniture, fine wine, and artwork he barely looked at anymore. Yet as he sat in his leather chair, he felt an emptiness he couldn't explain. He had worked his entire life for success, for riches, for the pride of saying, "I built this." But what had it cost him? When was the last time he had done something for someone who couldn't repay him? Clara, on the other hand, went home with sore feet and a growling stomach. But her heart was strangely at peace. She thought of the boy and how his smile had warmed her soul. She had nothing to offer except kindness, but maybe, just maybe, that was worth more than all the riches in the world. The next morning, as Clara entered the kitchen, she noticed something strange. There was a small bag waiting for her on the counter, filled with fresh bread, fruit, and a container of warm soup. No one said a word, but she had a feeling who it came from. A quiet gratitude filled her heart, yet she knew this story was far from over. Somewhere deep inside, Roberto was fighting a battle he had never faced before. The following days carried a quiet tension, like an unspoken conversation between Clara and Roberto. Each morning, Clara would find a small portion of extra food set aside for her, a gesture so subtle that no one else seemed to notice. She never asked where it came from, but deep down, she knew it was Roberto's way of silently acknowledging her heart. He never mentioned the incident with the boy, but she could feel his eyes on her from time to time, as if he was trying to understand something beyond what words could explain. Clara's life outside the restaurant was lonely. Her evenings were spent in the small, dimly lit room she called home. The walls were bare, the furniture second-hand, and the single window overlooked an alley where stray cats searched for scraps. But what weighed heavier than poverty was the silence. Sometimes, as she washed her hands at the end of the day, she would remember the sound of laughter from years ago, a life she had almost forgotten, when love seemed possible and dreams felt within reach. She had once believed she would never be alone. The man she had loved, Daniel, used to promise her a future that sounded almost like a fairy tale. "One day, we'll own our own place," he would say. "A restaurant, Clara, just like the ones we admire. And you'll never have to worry about money again." But when times got hard, Daniel chose the easy way out. He left, and with his departure, Clara lost more than a partner. She lost the piece of herself that believed she was worthy of a better life. Roberto, though surrounded by success, was haunted by his own loneliness. He had built his business from nothing, starting with one old stove and a dream. But along the way, something in him had hardened. His pursuit of riches had cost him the softness of human connection. Watching Clara now, this woman who owned nothing but gave everything, was like looking into a mirror of what he had once been but had long forgotten. One rainy afternoon, as the sky turned grey and the streets filled with rushing umbrellas, the boy appeared again. Clara spotted him shivering under a tree, his tiny frame soaked. She didn't hesitate. She grabbed an old towel from the kitchen, wrapped it around him and brought him inside. The staff looked alarmed. Customers weren't used to seeing a homeless child in the restaurant. Paula, the waitress, whispered sharply, "Clara, what are you doing? The boss is going to lose his mind if he sees this." But Roberto did see it. He walked in from the front, his shoes clicking on the wet floor. Everyone froze. Clara's heart pounded as she gently held the boy close, bracing for the harsh words she expected. Instead, Roberto said nothing. He took one long look at the child and then at Clara, and something in his expression softened, just barely. He turned to the staff. "Get him something warm to eat," he said, his voice calm but firm. The employees stared in shock, but no one dared to question him. Clara looked at him, her eyes wide, but Roberto didn't meet her gaze. He simply walked back to his office, as though something inside him was shifting in ways he couldn't fully understand. That night, when Clara left work, the boy was asleep under the awning by the back door. She crouched down, covering him with her old sweater, her heart breaking at the thought of him spending another cold night alone. As she walked home, rain soaking her shoes, she whispered to herself, "Why does life have to be this way? Why does kindness always feel so small in a world so full of pain?" Perhaps you, watching this now, have felt the same. Have you ever seen someone in need and wondered if your small act could truly make a difference? Share one word that describes what kindness means to you in the comments below. The next morning, the restaurant was quieter than usual. Clara arrived early, as she always did, and found the boy waiting outside, huddled against the cold wall. His small hands were wrapped around his knees, and his face was pale from exhaustion. Without a word, she helped him stand, led him to the kitchen, and gave him a small cup of warm milk. He looked at her with wide, trusting eyes, and for a moment, Clara felt something she hadn't felt in years, a sense of purpose, as if every struggle in her life had led to this small act of love. Roberto came in soon after. He didn't say anything to Clara, but his gaze lingered on the boy, then on her. Something inside him was changing. For years, his life had revolved around money, success, and the image of a self-made millionaire. But watching Clara, he realized there was a richness he had never known. It wasn't about luxury or status, it was about giving, even when you had nothing left to give. That night, Clara walked home under the quiet glow of the streetlights. She thought about the boy, about her own journey, and about what truly mattered. When she arrived in her small room, she sat on her bed and opened the Bible her mother had left her. It had been years since she had read it, but tonight something drew her to its pages. Her eyes landed on a verse from Matthew 25:35. "For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me." The words pierced her heart, like a warm light breaking through a storm. She realized that every act of kindness, every meal given, every touch of compassion, was not just about helping someone else. It was about reflecting the love of God, a love that doesn't measure worth by money, by success, or by appearance. Clara closed her eyes, whispering a prayer she hadn't spoken in years. "Lord, give me strength to keep giving even when I feel empty. Help me remember that you see the things no one else does." The next day, something unexpected happened. When Clara arrived at work, she found Roberto standing in the kitchen, looking different, quieter, almost humbled. He approached her, his voice low. "I saw the Bible verse you left open on the counter last night," he said. Clara frowned in confusion, then realized she must have left it there by accident. I used to read that same verse when I was young, Roberto continued, his eyes distant. Before I cared so much about building all this, somewhere along the way I forgot what really mattered. Clara didn't know what to say. She wasn't used to seeing him like this, a man who always carried himself with authority, now speaking like someone searching for something he had lost long ago. The boy, Roberto said quietly. We should do something for him, not just give him food. Maybe we can help him find a place to stay. For the first time, Clara saw not just the businessman in him, but the man with a heart that was waking up again. Kindness, she realized, is contagious. And perhaps God had placed her there not only to feed a hungry child, but to awaken something deeper in those who had forgotten how to feel. The days that followed were unlike any Clara had experienced before. Roberto began to change in small but undeniable ways. He arranged for the boy, whose name they learned was Lucas, to stay in a local shelter, making sure he had warm meals and a safe bed each night. It wasn't something Roberto spoke about openly, but Clara could see it in his actions. He had stopped seeing kindness as weakness. In fact, he began to realize that it was the greatest form of strength. One evening, as the restaurant closed and the last customer left, Roberto asked Clara to stay for a moment. They sat in the quiet dining area, the dim lights casting a warm glow over the empty tables. You know, Roberto began, his voice unsteady, I spent my whole life chasing success. I believed that if I made enough money, if I surrounded myself with luxury, I would feel fulfilled. But the truth is, I've never felt emptier. He paused, looking down at his hands, as though ashamed of his own words. Clara listened in silence. She understood what he was trying to say. Her own life had taught her that real richness had nothing to do with what you owned, but with what you could give from your heart. She reached across the table, placing her hand gently over his. It's never too late to find what truly matters, she said softly. Love and compassion are worth more than all the riches in the world. Her words sank deep into his soul. For the first time in years, Roberto felt something shift, a weight lifting from his chest. I used to believe in God, he admitted, but somewhere between working, paying bills, and building this business, I stopped listening. I thought I could do it all on my own. Clara smiled faintly. We all forget sometimes. But God never forgets us. Look at Lucas. He could have crossed paths with anyone, but he crossed yours. Maybe this is God's way of reminding you that there's more to life than what we can count in our bank accounts. Roberto's eyes softened. Do you really believe that? Yes, she said with quiet conviction. When we give, even if it's just a little, we are reflecting his love. I believe God sent that boy, not just for me, but for you, to show you that life is more than money and success. It's about people, about kindness, about the love we're willing to share. The room felt sacred for a moment, as if something unseen had entered. Clara remembered another verse from her mother's Bible and recited it gently. Give, and it will be given to you. A good measure pressed down, shaken together and running over will be poured into your lap. For with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. Luke 6:38. Tears welled in Roberto's eyes, but he quickly brushed them away. I want to change, he said. I don't know how yet, but I want to start by doing something good. Not because I'll gain anything, but because it feels right. Clara nodded. Start with one act of kindness. Sometimes that's all it takes to change everything. That night, as she walked home, Clara felt a strange warmth in her heart. It wasn't just about Lucas or Roberto. It was about the realization that God uses the smallest moments, like sharing a simple meal, to heal hearts that the world considers too broken or too poor to matter. The next morning dawned brighter than usual, as if the city itself sensed that something had changed. Clara arrived at the restaurant and found Lucas sitting at one of the tables, eating breakfast prepared by Roberto himself. It was a simple meal, eggs, bread, and warm milk, but the way Lucas smiled made it look like a feast. Clara felt tears sting her eyes. This boy who just days ago had sat alone on the cold pavement was now being treated with dignity and care. And it all began with a single act of kindness, a small choice that had stirred hearts in ways no one could have predicted. Roberto stood near the counter watching the scene. His usual stern expression had softened into something rare: gratitude. He walked over to Clara, holding 2 cups of coffee. "I don't think I've ever thanked you," he said quietly. "Not just for what you did for Lucas, but for reminding me of something I had forgotten. I've spent my life building this restaurant, making money, chasing success, but I forgot what it feels like to simply care." He handed her the cup, his eyes meeting hers. "Thank you for opening my eyes." Clara smiled, though she said nothing. She didn't need to. The warmth in her chest spoke louder than words. For years she had carried the weight of her past, her losses, her pain, the dreams that had slipped through her fingers. But today, she felt that weight lifting. It wasn't because her life had become easier or richer in a material sense. It was because she had witnessed something far more valuable: the power of love to transform hearts. Lucas, finishing his meal, ran over to Clara and hugged her tightly. She crouched down, holding him as if he were her own child. In that embrace, she felt something she hadn't felt in years: a sense of family, of purpose, of being exactly where God wanted her to be. The restaurant, once just a place where she worked to survive, now felt like a place where miracles could happen in the simplest, most ordinary ways. Later that evening, when the last light of the day faded, Clara sat in her small room, the Bible open on her lap. She read from Proverbs 19:17, "Whoever is kind to the poor lends to the Lord, and he will reward them for what they have done." She closed her eyes and whispered, "Thank you, Lord, for using me, even when I feel small." This story, though it might seem like just a moment between a cook, a child, and a businessman, holds a question for every one of us. How often do we walk past someone who needs just a little kindness? A smile, a warm meal, a word of encouragement. These small acts may seem insignificant, but they carry the power to change lives, including our own. If this story touched your heart, I invite you to take it as a reminder. Look around you today. Maybe there is someone in your path who needs your kindness, someone who needs to feel that they are seen and valued. And if you want to keep hearing stories that inspire and lift your spirit, subscribe to this channel, like this video, and watch the next story we've prepared for you. It might just be the message you need to hear today.